Welcome to my channel. My name is Safari Richmond. Today we'll be using C++ to perform a certain task using the if statements. So the if and else if functions, we'll be using C++ to perform a certain task which will include those things. Our question for the day is we have to write C++ program that accepts power factor of an electrical load and classifies it using the table below. So power factor of an electrical device, we know power factor lies between 0 and 1. It is never greater than 1 and it is never less than 0. So our table is saying that if we have the power factor less than 0 or greater than 1, our output must be invalid power factor. And then if we have our power factor 0.0 between 0.0 and 0.5, we must have a poor power factor. Between 0.51 and 0.8, we must have fair power factor. And then between 0.81 and 0.95, you must have good power factor. Then 0.96 to 1 is an excellent power factor. So let's get started. So we have our C++, this is our interface. And then we know our basic setup rules. We have to use the hash include, IOStream. And then using namespace std. Using namespace std will eliminate us from writing std at the end of every line. And then we have our main, and then we open our curly bracket. That's where our work will be done. So according to the question, the program must accept power factor from an electrical load. So that means the user must input a certain value, which is the power factor of the item. So the thing the integer will type must be a number. But here we will not use integer because power factor deals with decimals. We have 0 0.0 0.0. So we use floats. So let me use float p, where p is just a variable representing power factor. And then if we are using float p, we want C++ to print out enter power factor to the user. Enter power factor. Then we end with a semicolon. And then after that, we see in, therefore, we need to, we are taking the value from the user. So we see in P, which is the variable we use there. Now we have our C out and C in. So let me save this. Let me save this so that we can give a test to it. Let me use if as the name. Okay, it says, yeah, there is an error here, IOStream T. So if you run it, you have enter power factor. Our numbers are just joined to the statement, so we just use semicolon space so that we can have the space to enter our power factor. Okay, now let's state the condition that if power factor, which is P, if P is less than 0, or, so we use the bar, that vertical bar, double to represent or if P is greater than 0, we want the system to see out invalid power factor. Then we end. And then else, if the power factor is between 0 and 0.5. So if P is greater than or equal to 0.00, and if P is greater than 0 and at the same time P, which is our power factor, is less than 0.80, then we want our code to print out Cout poor power factor. We end, and then else if again, if our power factor, we are using P, is greater than 0. Sorry, I made a mistake here. There is 0.5. So if P is greater than 0.5 and P is less than or equal to 0.8, then we see out fair power factor. We end, and then else if our P, which is the power factor, is greater than 0.5, 0.80, here too is 0.80, and P is less than or equal to 0.95, we see out display on the screen as good power factor. We end, and then finally our last option according to the questions is if it is between 0.96 and 0 and 1, we have excellent power factor. So this is our final one. So else, which means if our power factor does not match anything we have written or anything in the code, then it should print out excellent power factor. So else we open our bracket, Cout excellent power factor. So this is the end. Then we return 0 semicolon. Let's try this code. It says enter power factor, then let's use -1, which is an invalid power factor. So that's right. Then let's try 0.96. Hi. Ready,